My name is Ailen Hayes. I'm 28, and though the well-worn paths of my childhood were carved through a small, predictable town in Connecticut, my present, and I desperately hoped my future, were firmly rooted here in Portland, Maine. This city, with its salty air and independent spirit, was where I was painstakingly trying to breathe life into my dream, a graphic design brand I'd christened the Portland Beacon. It was more than just a name. It was a symbol of the light I hoped to build for myself, a steady beam in the often turbulent waters of my life. That particular Tuesday morning, a crisp mid-autumn sun, the color of pale cider, slanted through the large window of my cozy, if slightly cramped, Munjoy Hill apartment. It illuminated the prototypes I was meticulously arranging on my work table, a series of elegantly designed notebooks featuring a stylized lighthouse motif, a desktop calendar with delicate wave patterns, and a set of greeting cards inspired by Maine's rugged coastline. Each piece was a testament to countless late nights, a tangible piece of my soul. I allowed myself a small, hopeful smile as I glanced at the vision board tacked above my desk, a collage of inspiring images, color palettes, and a prominent flyer for the upcoming Maine Artisan Fair just a few weeks away. This fair was meant to be my launchpad the moment the Portland Beacon truly set sail. Then my phone, lying innocuously beside a stack of cardstock, buzzed once, twice. The screen lit up with a text from my younger brother Ethan. My hopeful smile faltered, a familiar knot tightening in my stomach. SOS. Big one this time. Call me. Urgent. The words stark against the bright screen felt like a sudden squall, threatening to capsize the fragile optimism I'd so carefully constructed. This was Ethan's signature prelude to a financial tempest, one that invariably left me bailing water. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of creativity, suddenly felt smaller. The scent of fresh coffee and paper stock was overshadowed by a rising tide of anxiety. I tried to ignore the insistent thrum of the phone, turning back to my designs, my fingers tracing the embossed lighthouse on a journal cover. The Maine Artisan Fair. It wasn't just an event. It was everything. The booth fee, the initial print run for my inventory, the marketing materials. All of it was meticulously budgeted, funded by years of freelance gigs, scrimping and saving every dollar a step closer to independence. The phone buzzed again, a call this time. Ethan. I let it go to voicemail, my heart hammering against my ribs. He wouldn't give up. He never did. And soon, if his usual pattern held, my mother would join the chorus. A sharp, unwelcome memory surfaced 2 years ago, a prestigious design workshop in New York I'd been ecstatic to attend. The fee was paid, my bags were practically packed. Then came Ethan's SOS. A gambling debt he'd tearfully confessed, threatening dire consequences. I'd pulled out of the workshop, forfeiting the fee, and wired him the money. Just this once, he'd promised, his voice thick with an actor's contrition. I'll pay you back every cent, I swear. The repayment, of course, never materialized. The workshop opportunity was lost. It was always just this once. As if on cue, my phone rang again. This time the caller ID displayed Mom, Brenda Hayes. I took a shallow breath and answered, trying to keep my voice even. Hi, Mom. Ailen, honey, thank God. Have you spoken to Ethan? Her voice was already laced with that specific brand of fretful urgency she reserved for Ethan's escapades. He texted. I said, keeping my tone carefully neutral. I'm in the middle of something for the fair, Mom. Oh, Ailen, this is serious. Really serious this time. There was a practiced tremor in her voice. Your brother? He's in a terrible bind. He needs our help. He needs your help. We're family, darling. We have to be there for each other. The familiar guilt trip began its insidious creep. I pictured her in their Connecticut kitchen, my father Mark probably hovering in the background, nodding in silent agreement, always deferring to her emotional lead when it came to Ethan. Mom, I've helped so many times, and he never learns. I have the fair coming up, every penny is allocated. I know, honey, I know you're working hard. She conceded, her voice softening strategically. But this is different. He sounds so scared. If you don't help him, I don't know what will happen. Your father and we've done all we can from our end. Which I knew from experience usually meant they'd given him a lecture and a token amount, leaving the real financial heavy lifting to me. The conversation circled a well-worn dance of obligation and resentment until I finally wearily agreed to speak to Ethan. I hung up my head throbbing. With trembling fingers, I logged into my online banking. The balance in my artisan fair fund was healthy but precise. There was no room for error, no buffer for another of Ethan's emergencies. The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold fist. Ethan called a minute later. His voice when he spoke was a carefully crafted blend of panic and desperation. Thank God. I'm in deep, really deep. It's bad." He launched into a convoluted story involving a misunderstanding with some very impatient people, a story that, despite its dramatic flourishes, felt thin, rehearsed. He needed money, a specific, substantial sum. "Just this last time, i.e., I swear on my life. I'll get a new job. I'll go to meetings, anything. Just get me out of this." The amount he named sent a chill through me. It was almost to the dollar the exact amount I had painstakingly saved for the main artisan fair, my entire launch fund. "Ethan, that's everything I have for the fair." I whispered the prototypes on my desk, suddenly looking like foolish, expensive dreams. I know it's a lot to ask," he said, his voice cracking. "But I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death. You're the only one who can help me, Please." Hours seemed to pass in a blur of increasingly desperate pleas from him, interspersed with tearful calls from my mother reinforcing his narrative. Exhausted, emotionally battered, and cornered by years of conditioned responsibility, I finally caved. With a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding, I logged back into my bank and transferred a significant portion of my fair fund to Ethan's account, leaving just enough I hoped to cover the absolute bare minimum for a scaled-down presence at the fair, if that. He swore it was enough to handle the immediate crisis. A few hours later, trying to salvage my shattered focus and recalculate my now decimated fair budget, I idly scrolled through Instagram. A new post from a distant cousin popped up, a short, blurry video clip from a local, rather notorious high-stakes poker night in their Connecticut town. It was time-stamped from the previous evening, and there in the center of a raucous group looking carefree and animated as he threw chips onto the table was Ethan, the same Ethan who just hours ago had claimed to be in a life-or-death situation. A cold fury, sharper and more visceral than I'd ever felt, washed over me. This wasn't a crisis. It was a con, another elaborate performance. My hands shook as I navigated back to my banking app. I had to see the damage. My breath hitched. The Artisan Fair Fund, the account I had just hours ago transferred a large sum from, was now almost entirely empty. He hadn't just taken what I'd reluctantly agreed to, he'd somehow gained access to more, or my parents had facilitated it, draining nearly every cent I'd earmarked for my dream. The room tilted. The prototypes, once symbols of hope, now seemed to mock me with their silent, glossy surfaces. I called Ethan. No answer. I called my parents. My mother was evasive, her voice suddenly brittle. "Well, Ailen, he must have had his reasons. You know how persuasive he can be." My father mumbled something about boys being boys and needing to learn their own lessons, a stunning piece of hypocrisy given they'd just facilitated this. The excuses, the enabling, the sheer blatant disregard for me, for my dreams, for my financial well-being, it all crashed down with the weight of years. The main artisan fair, my one big shot, was gone. Impossible. I sank into my chair, the silence of the apartment deafening. The earlier autumn sunlight had faded, and shadows now stretched long across the floor, mirroring the cold dread seeping into my bones. A chilling clarity began to pierce through the anger and betrayal. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my life, my future, my sanity. My gaze fell on my phone. I picked it up, my hand surprisingly steady. I opened my contacts. Ethan, Mom, Dad. My finger hovered over the block option next to Ethan's name, then drifted to my mother's, then my father's. A single tear, hot and heavy with years of resentment and a dawning, terrifying resolve, escaped and traced a path down my cheek. Could I do it? Could I actually sever the lines that had bound and burdened me for so long? The question hung in the suffocating silence of my apartment. Could I do it? My thumb trembled over my phone screen a millimeter away from severing ties that felt as old as my own bones. Then a surge of something cold and resolute born from the ashes of that morning's hope flooded through me. Yes, I could. I had to. With a steadying breath that did little to calm the frantic bird in my chest, I pressed block next to Ethan's name. The digital finality of it was shocking. Then, with a momentum fueled by years of simmering resentment, I found my mother's contact. Block. My father's. Block. Each tap was a small explosion, a severing. A wave of pure, unadulterated panic crashed over me so intense I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. What had I done? But then almost immediately, an eerie, terrifying lightness spread through my limbs, as if a monstrous weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had just been lifted. I was adrift, untethered, and utterly alone. The next few days passed in a blur of emotional whiplash. My Portland apartment, once my creative sanctuary, now felt like both a fortress and a cell. Outside, the city continued its autumnal symphony. Leaves blazed in hues of gold and crimson. The air carried the crisp scent of the nearby ocean, a vibrant, indifferent beauty that was a stark contrast to the gray tempest raging within me. Guilt, sharp and familiar, gnawed at me in the quiet hours. Had I been too harsh? Were they truly suffering? Fear, cold and insidious, whispered of a future where I was completely alone, a pariah to my own blood. But beneath it all, anger still simmered, a righteous protective fury for the dreams they had so carelessly trampled, for the years of manipulation I had endured. And sometimes, in fleeting, fragile moments, a nascent sense of empowerment would flicker. The terrifying, exhilarating realization that I was for the first time solely in control of my own lines of communication, my own financial boundaries. The silence from my family was deafening a void where constant demands and emotional blackmail had once echoed. It was a relief, but also a confirmation of their true colors. No frantic attempts to reach me through other means, no apologies, just nothing. Or so I thought. A week after the blocking, an email landed in my inbox forwarded by a well-meaning but perpetually dramatic cousin from Connecticut. The subject line in all caps read, "Your mother is sick with worry. Urgent message from Aunt Carol." My stomach twisted. Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister, was the family's designated guilt tripper-in-chief. The attached voicemail, when I reluctantly played it, was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. Aunt Carol's voice, dripping with saccharine disapproval, lamented my cruel and sudden abandonment, detailed my mother's supposed decline into a state of nervous prostration, conveniently omitting any mention of Ethan's actions or their financial complicity, and strongly implied that any further deterioration in Brenda's health would be squarely on my conscience. It ended with a pious, "I'm just praying you'll come to your senses, Ailen, before it's too late. Family is everything." I deleted the email and the voicemail, my hands shaking slightly, but the poisonous seeds of doubt had been sown. The practical reality of my situation was equally grim. The Maine artisan fair. My dream. With my savings decimated, it was a fantasy. Humiliation burned in my cheeks as I forced myself to call Sarah, the fair organizer. I mumbled some vague excuse about unforeseen personal circumstances and the possibility of having to withdraw. Sarah, to her credit, was kind but professional. "I understand, Ailen. Things happen. But the booth payment deadline is the end of this week. If you can't make it, please let me know so I can offer the spot to someone on the wait list." The finality in her voice was another nail in my coffin of dreams. I spent days staring at my design software, my creativity choked by a thick fog of anxiety and despair. The Portland Beacon prototypes on my shelf felt like relics of a life that was no longer mine. I started avoiding calls from unknown numbers, terrified it might be another family emissary. To escape the suffocating confines of my apartment and my own head, I found myself drawn to The Wandering Quill, a charmingly cluttered independent bookstore and cafe nestled on a cobblestone side street in the Old Port. It was run by Eleanor Vance, a woman who looked to be in her late 60s, with kind, crinkling eyes, a cascade of silver hair, usually held back with a colorful scarf, and an air of quiet wisdom. I'd discovered it a few months prior and occasionally used its quiet corners to work when my apartment felt too small. I ordered a black coffee I couldn't really afford and found a small table by a window stacked high with used poetry books. I tried to sketch to lose myself in the familiar comfort of lines and shapes, but my hand felt clumsy, my mind barren. My distress must have been palpable. Over the next couple of visits, Eleanor, with a gentle perceptiveness that never felt intrusive, began to engage me in brief conversations. She'd comment approvingly on a new book delivery, ask my opinion on the best type of tea for a rainy afternoon, or share a humorous anecdote about a particularly eccentric customer. She never pried, never asked about the shadows under my eyes, or the way I'd sometimes just stare blankly at my empty sketchbook. She simply offered a calm, grounding presence. Then came the email from Sarah, final reminder, artisan fair booth payment overdue. It was official. My last sliver of hope for the fair had been extinguished. That afternoon, I sat at my usual table in The Wandering Quill, the unopened email burning a hole in my phone screen. The weight of it all, the lost money, the broken dream, the familial betrayal, the crushing loneliness Aunt Carol's condemning voice became unbearable. Before I knew it, tears were welling, blurring the poetry titles in front of me. My carefully constructed composure shattered. Eleanor, who had been quietly shelving books nearby, approached my table. "Ailen, my dear," she said softly, her voice laced with concern. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." And just like that, the dam broke. It wasn't a hysterical outburst, just a quiet, desperate unraveling. The words tumbled out, the stolen savings, the shattered plans for the Portland Beacon, the guilt, the anger, the overwhelming feeling of being a failure, a terrible daughter, a terrible sister, a fool for ever believing I could build something of my own. Eleanor listened patiently, her gaze never wavering. When I finally choked to a halt, exhausted and raw, she simply nodded, then disappeared behind the counter, returning a moment later with a steaming mug of herbal tea. "Chamomile and lavender," she said, placing it gently before me. "Good for frayed nerves." She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. Instead, as I sipped the fragrant tea, she shared a brief, unvarnished story from her own youth, a time when her family's expectations had clashed violently with her own aspirations, a period of profound loneliness and difficult choices that had ultimately led her down an unexpected path to owning this very bookstore. "Sometimes, Ailen," she said, her eyes holding a deep, empathetic understanding, "the paths we are forced to carve for ourselves away from the ones others expect of us are the ones that lead us to where we truly need to be. It's rarely easy, but it is possible to find your own light." She didn't offer me money. I wouldn't have accepted it. But then she said, "Those designs you were working on, the Portland Beacon, they sounded lovely. I have a little empty corner by the front window gathering dust. If you like, you could put a few of your smaller pieces there. No pressure, no commission, just to see what happens. Let people enjoy your work." Her eyes then twinkled, and as it happens, the Portland Artists Co-op is having their monthly meet and greet this evening. Lots of good people there sharing ideas, supporting each other. She slid a small, brightly colored flyer across the table. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in days, hope, fragile and tentative, stirred within me. It was an unexpected lifeline, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated kindness. I looked at the flyer in my hand, the bold announcement of the co-op meeting. My apartment suddenly felt less like a prison and more like a stagnant pond I needed to escape. "Thank you, Eleanor." I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." She simply smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her kind eyes. "You find your footing, dear. One small step at a time." The flyer felt warm in my hand. The Artists Co-op. It was a terrifying prospect, putting myself out there again, raw and vulnerable. But the alternative, sinking back into the despair that had consumed me, was even more terrifying. As I left the Wandering Quill that evening, the lavender sky of a Maine dusk was painting the old port in soft hues. I clutched the flyer. A new, fragile resolve began to form amidst the wreckage of my old plans. I would go. It was just one small step into an unknown future away from the long, suffocating shadow of my family, and perhaps, just perhaps, towards a community that might understand. The flyer Eleanor had given me felt like a flimsy shield as I stood at the threshold of the artists' co-op meeting. It was held in a sprawling, repurposed warehouse space in the Bayside neighborhood, a place thrumming with a chaotic, infectious energy. Loud chatter bounced off the high ceilings, mingling with the faint scent of turpentine sawdust and something that might have been freshly fired clay. For a moment, a wave of social anxiety, so potent it nearly buckled my knees, urged me to turn and flee back to the familiar solitude of my apartment. I was an outsider, an imposter, my dreams in tatters. What could I possibly offer or gain here? But then I pictured Eleanor's encouraging smile, her gentle words, one small step at a time. I took that step. Inside it was a vibrant tapestry of Portland's creative scene. Painters discussed pigments, jewelers hunched over intricate designs, and a group was animatedly debating the merits of different yarn weights. I hovered near the refreshment table, nursing a cup of lukewarm cider, feeling acutely self-conscious. Lost, a friendly voice cut through my internal monologue. I turned to see a young man with paint smudges on his jeans and a warm, open smile. He had a cascade of dark curly hair pulled back loosely and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything. First time here, I'm Sam, by the way. Samuel Chen, if we're being formal, but nobody is. He gestured around the lively room with a half-eaten cookie. I mostly wrestle with clay, try to make it look like something people might want on their shelves. His easygoing manner was disarming. Ailen, I managed, offering a small, hesitant smile. Ailen Hayes. And yes, first time. Eleanor Vance from the Wandering Quill suggested I come. Eleanor's a gem. Sam's smile widened. Anyone she sends our way is automatically good people. What's your medium, Ailen? I found myself, to my own surprise, talking about my graphic design, my fledgling Portland Beacon brand, even vaguely alluding to my recent setback without going into the messy family details. Sam listened intently, then introduced me to a few other artists, a textile designer named Maria, who created stunning hand-dyed scarves, and an older gentleman, Tom, who carved intricate birds from driftwood. They shared snippets of their own journeys, the triumphs and the inevitable frustrations of the creative life. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny spark of connection, a sense that perhaps I wasn't entirely alone in my struggles. The following Monday, I took Eleanor up on her offer. With a mix of trepidation and a sliver of renewed hope, I arranged a small selection of my Portland Beacon items, a few lighthouse-themed journals, some wave-patterned greeting cards, and a set of minimalist botanical print notepads in the cozy corner she'd cleared for me by the front window of the Wandering Quill. It felt incredibly vulnerable putting my work out there after such a devastating blow to my confidence. To my astonishment, people noticed. A woman bought 2 journals complimenting the paper quality. An elderly man purchased a set of cards saying they reminded him of his summers in Bar Harbor. Each small sale, each positive comment Eleanor relayed to me felt like a balm to my bruised spirit. They weren't going to fund a new booth at the Maine Artisan Fair, not by a long shot, but they were something. They were validation, encouraged a new, more focused energy began to flow. My little apartment once again became a hive of activity, but this time the desperation was replaced by a quiet determination. I worked with the meager funds I had sourcing affordable, sustainable paper stock Sam had recommended from a local supplier and experimenting with smaller, more accessible product ideas. I spent hours at my desk, the city lights of Portland twinkling outside my window like distant, encouraging stars, losing myself in the rhythm of design and creation. Then an email from my mother, Brenda, landed in my inbox like an unexploded ordnance. The subject line simply read, "Thinking of you." My heart lurched. It was a carefully worded missive, a confusing cocktail of passive-aggressive guilt and tentative olive branches. She wrote about how quiet the house in Connecticut was without my calls, how worried they all were about me being so isolated in Portland. She mentioned Ethan was trying his best, a phrase that usually meant he was doing nothing of the sort, and that family is family Ailen through thick and thin, no matter what misunderstandings occur. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the stolen money, or the pain they'd caused, just a subtle manipulative tug at the old strings of obligation. The email sat in my inbox for a day, a toxic cloud. A part of me, the conditioned daughter, felt a pang of guilt, but another, newer, stronger part, the Ailen who had pressed block, recognized the pattern. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about re-establishing control. With a steady hand, I moved the email to the trash. The impulse to reply died on my fingertips. I wouldn't be drawn back in. A few days later, a practical setback threatened to derail my fragile momentum. A batch of recycled cardstock I'd ordered online from a new budget-friendly supplier arrived, and it was terrible. Flimsy, with an inconsistent texture that made printing a nightmare. It was for a set of new postcard designs I'd been excited about, a key part of my slowly rebuilding inventory. Disheartened, I slumped at my desk, the faulty cardstock, a physical manifestation of my dwindling resources and the precariousness of my situation. I mentioned it in passing during a brief chat with Sam at the co-op's shared workspace later that week, trying to sound more frustrated than desperate. That Saturday morning, I was sketching half-heartedly at my kitchen table when a knock echoed through my apartment. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I opened the door to find Sam standing there, a cheerful grin on his face, flanked by Maria, the textile designer, and Tom, the woodcarver. Sam held up a couple of neatly wrapped packages of high-quality cardstock. "Heard you had a paper emergency," he said, his eyes twinkling. "We raided our stashes. Figured a fellow Portland creative in distress needed a rescue mission." And Maria brought cookies. Maria held up a tin, smiling warmly. "Oatmeal raisin, brain food." Tom simply nodded, a gentle smile on his weathered face, holding a small, perfectly carved wooden chickadee. "A little something for inspiration," he mumbled. I was speechless. They trooped into my small apartment, and for the next few hours it was filled with an energy I hadn't experienced in years. Sam, with his quick hands, helped me troubleshoot my printer settings for the new cardstock. Maria offered insightful critiques on my latest designs, and Tom surprisingly had a knack for meticulous folding and assembly. We worked, we talked, we laughed, fueled by coffee and Maria's delicious cookies. The oppressive weight that had settled in my apartment since the betrayal seemed to lift, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the struggling radiator. For the first time, I felt the true unconditional support of a community of people who gave without expecting anything in return, who simply wanted to see another artist succeed. This was different from the tangled, obligation-laden support of my family. This was genuine. With their help, the postcards were salvaged and looked even better on the superior cardstock. As they were leaving, a comfortable camaraderie settling between us, I felt a profound sense of gratitude that left me choked with emotion. My little display at the Wandering Quill continued to bring in a trickle of sales, enough to cover my immediate living expenses and reinvest a tiny bit back into the Portland Beacon. I started attending the co-op meetings regularly, no longer a shy observer, but an active participant, sharing my ideas, offering feedback, and slowly, steadily building my confidence. A week later, an email from the co-op landed in my inbox. It wasn't a bill or a plea for help. It was an official confirmation. "Congratulations, Ailen. Your application for a booth at the Portland Pierside Creators Market next month has been approved." It wasn't the grand main artisan fair I had originally pinned all my hopes on, but it was something real, a tangible opportunity. A chance for the Portland Beacon to truly have its first official, albeit smaller, launch. I looked around my small apartment at the stacks of newly printed postcards, the journals waiting for their finishing touches, the little wooden chickadee Tom had given me perched on my monitor. A radiant smile spread across my face, chasing away the last of the shadows. I had a goal, and this time I wasn't alone. I had a team, a chosen family cheering me on from the shores of Portland. The morning of the Portland Pierside Creators Market dawned bright and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed to hum with possibility. A nervous, excited energy thrummed through me as Sam, Eleanor, and I navigated the bustling setup. My little booth, nestled between a potter displaying vibrant ceramic mugs and a jeweler with delicate silver creations, was modest, but it was mine. The Portland Beacon banner, one I'd painstakingly designed and had printed with my last few dollars, hung proudly above a carefully curated display of my journals cards and the newly finished postcards. Eleanor had brought a small antique wooden crate to add height to one corner, and Sam, ever practical, had a toolkit ready for any last-minute emergencies. Their presence was a warm, steadying force against the butterflies doing acrobatics in my stomach. "Looks fantastic," Ailen Sam said, stepping back to admire our handiwork, a genuine grin lighting up his face. Maria and Tom from the co-op arrived a few minutes later with a thermos of hot coffee and a box of donuts, their cheerful encouragement bolstering my spirits. The market officially opened, and a slow trickle of people began to wander through. My initial anxiety spiked as the first few potential customers glanced at my booth and moved on. Was my work good enough? Had I made a terrible mistake? Eleanor, sensing my unease, caught my eye and gave me a subtle, reassuring nod from where she was, brows nearby. Sam, bless him, started enthusiastically pointing out my wave-patterned notebooks to a couple he knew who were looking for unique Portland-made gifts. Gradually, things began to shift. A woman paused her fingers, tracing the embossed lighthouse on one of my journals. "This is lovely," she said, her smile genuine. "The quality of the paper is wonderful." She bought it along with a set of matching cards. Then another sale and another. People were drawn to the clean, coastal-inspired designs, the subtle nods to Maine's unique charm. They asked about my inspiration, and I found myself talking about my love for Portland, for the wild beauty of the coast, for the steadfastness of its lighthouses. Each conversation, each sale was a small affirmation chipping away at the self-doubt that had plagued me for so long. A couple of local bloggers stopped by, intrigued by the Portland Beacon name and snapping photos of my display. I even exchanged business cards with a gift shop owner from Kennebunkport who expressed interest in a wholesale order. The booth was humming, a steady stream of customers admiring, chatting, purchasing. I was in my element, sharing my passion, feeling a sense of connection and purpose I hadn't realized I'd been so starved for. Then, right in the middle of the afternoon rush, as I was carefully wrapping a set of postcards for a particularly enthusiastic tourist, my phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. My heart gave a familiar, unwelcome lurch. I tried to ignore it, but it buzzed again, insistent. Excusing myself, a knot of dread tightening in my chest, I stepped to the back of the booth. "Hello, Ailen? It's Ethan." His voice was strained, laced with an urgency that immediately set my teeth on edge. "You need to come home. Right now." The familiar script. My carefully constructed composure threatened to crack. "Ethan, I'm in the middle of something very important here." "No, you don't understand." "It's Mom," he said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. She's really weak. She collapsed this morning. The doctors don't know what's wrong. She keeps asking for you, Ailen. She just keeps saying your name. Dad's a wreck. You have to come." A wave of cold washed over me. Mom collapsed. For a dizzying moment, the old guilt, the ingrained sense of filial duty surged. Images of my mother, frail and ill, flashed through my mind. Was this real? Had my decision to cut ties truly pushed her to this? But then Eleanor's gentle words echoed, focus on what you can control. The memory of Ethan's carefree face at that poker game, the blatant lies, the stolen money, it all came rushing back, a cold dose of reality. I took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying myself against the cheerful cacophony of the market. "Ethan," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, devoid of the anger or panic that would have once consumed me. "Which hospital is she in?" A beat of silence. St. Mary's. In Waterbury. And what's the name of the doctor who saw her this morning?" Another hesitation, longer this time. "Dr. Peterson. Or Henderson." "Look, does it matter? She needs you." "What were her specific symptoms, Ethan, before she collapsed?" I pressed, my voice quiet but firm. He stammered, offering vague complaints. Dizziness, fatigue, a general malaise. The story was unraveling, flimsy and transparent, just like all the others. The manipulation was so clear now, so achingly familiar. He wasn't describing a medical emergency. He was reciting lines from their old, tired play. A profound sadness settled over me, not for them, but for the years I had allowed myself to be a puppet in their dramas. But beneath the sadness, there was also a bedrock of resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "Ethan," I said, and this time, my voice held only a quiet finality. "You and Dad need to take care of Mom. I hope she feels better soon. My path is here now in Portland. I won't be coming back." I ended the call before he could launch into another tirade of pleas or accusations. I didn't block the number this time. There was no need. The power they once held over me was gone. I simply muted the notifications from his contact, a silent, decisive click. I turned back to my booth. Sam and Eleanor were watching me, their expressions carefully neutral, but underscored with a quiet concern. I met their gaze and offered a small, genuine smile. "Everything's fine," I said, and the surprising truth was it was. More than fine. A sense of lightness, true and unburdened this time, filled me. I spent the rest of the afternoon completely present, engaging with customers, sharing my work, my energy renewed. By the time the market began to wind down, the Portland Beacon was a resounding success. I had sold nearly everything I'd brought, taken a gratifying number of custom orders, and even had a couple of tentative offers for collaborations from other local artists. As the sun began to dip towards the harbor painting, the sky in strokes of lavender and rose, we packed up. Sam, Eleanor, Maria, and Tom, my Portland family, were there, laughing and helping, their easy camaraderie a comforting embrace. We celebrated later with pizza and craft beer at a noisy, cheerful pub in the Old Port, the conversation flowing easily, punctuated by shared dreams and silly jokes. Later that night, alone on the small balcony of my apartment, I looked out at the twinkling lights of Portland spread before me like a carpet of scattered stars. The cool night air felt clean and invigorating. In my hand I held one of my own journals, its cover embossed with the steadfast lighthouse. A quiet contentment settled deep within me. I wasn't lonely. I had a business still fledgling but full of promise. I had a community, a chosen family who saw me, supported me, and celebrated with me. And most importantly, I had myself, a self I was finally learning to trust and cherish. The lighthouse, my beacon, wasn't just a design anymore. It was a symbol of the light I had found within the one I had fought so hard to ignite and protect. The journey ahead would undoubtedly have its own storms, its own challenges, but standing there under the vast main sky, I knew with a certainty that resonated in my very core that I was ready. I had found my harbor, and my beacon was shining brightly. Ailen didn't just cut ties. She severed the invisible strings that had kept her small, silent, and waiting for someone else's approval. She lost the artisan fair, but she gained something far more valuable: her freedom, her voice, her beacon. The family who told her she was selfish, they didn't see the light she carried. But the people at the Wandering Quill, the Portland Artists Co-op, the community that rallied when her hands shook and her hope ran thin, they did. Because sometimes it's not your family by blood that lifts you up. It's the people who show up with cookies, cardstock, and an open heart. It's the ones who say, "You matter. Your work matters. You belong here." Ailen didn't let betrayal define her. She let it fuel her. And in doing so, she proved something we all need to hear. Your story isn't over when others stop believing in you. Your story starts when you believe in yourself. What about you? Have you ever had to break free from the people who were supposed to love you most? Have you ever risked everything for a dream no one else could see and found unexpected hands reaching out to help? Tell your story in the comments. Because someone out there may be where Ailen was, tired, heartbroken, but quietly hoping for a sign. Your words could be that sign. And if Ailen's journey stirred something inside you, if you know what it's like to choose yourself, even when it's terrifying, follow the channel. Here we tell stories like Ailen's. Stories of quiet courage, of rebuilding, of finding your lighthouse when the storm feels endless. Stories that say, you don't have to be everything for everyone. You don't have to keep paying the price for someone else's mistakes, and you are not selfish for wanting peace. This is your safe harbor. Your story matters, and your light, it's just beginning to shine.